10 Things Netflix is Hiding About Pablo Escobar. Netflix was founded in 1997, just 4 years after the death of Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, and it has had its fair share of fame, hits, and controversy since then. While the same can be said of Escobar, who often attracted fame, hits, and controversy in a single act. It's no surprise that when the two collided in 2015 with the release of Narcos, fame and controversy ensued. Naturally, Netflix has been praised for its thorough research, as well as the artistic writing and direction of Brazilian filmmaker José Padilha, which lent the story a rich, dramatic effect. However, in a story as political as this, there could be no such thing as perfection, and the devil can sometimes be found in the details. Trying to mess with it now? Hiding may be a strong word. Still, this video seeks to expose other aspects of the story that you may not have known. Aspects such as the behind-the-scenes, the over-dramatized truths, the cartels, the surviving Escobar side of the story, and more. Are you excited? Then make sure to watch the video till the end. Here we begin. Number 10. The pro-drug stance of Wagner Moura. Wagner played Pablo Escobar to perfection in Narcos. The Brazilian actor was praised for the role and has become so associated with Escobar that his images appear when the drug lord's name is searched on Google. They do, however, share much more.
A very complex question, because he was absolutely a mean and evil person, but at the same time he was a human being. He was a person, and
Moura believes that drugs like cocaine should be legalized, and after living with Escobar, he believes this even more strongly. This is because in a world where cocaine was legal, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria would have been mostly recognized as a shrewd businessman who became wealthy from nothing and gave back to the poor. Most of his ordered killings began with shutting down officials who wanted to lock him up or extradite him. But, in your opinion, should cocaine be legalized? Let us know in the comments below. Number 9. Family opinion. Of course you had to expect this, and it's important because you have to wonder how much of the story and how much of Pablo's interaction with his family was accurate and how the Escobars felt about it. To answer your question, Pablo's brother was enraged by the show, and if you watch the show you're probably wondering where Escobar's brother was the entire time. Pablo Escobar's brother is Roberto Escobar. He was also the cartel's accountant until his arrest after Pablo's death. So believe us when we say that when the show depicted another accountant named Blackbeard being arrested and then snitching on the cartel to officials, Roberto was furious. And why not? The scene was entirely changed. Number 8. Carlos Leder's influence. Carlos Leder was the son of Klaus Wilhelm Leder, a German who moved to Colombia, changed his name to Guillermo Leder, and married Elena Rivas, a Colombian. Carlos later moved to America with his mother after his parents divorced, and he eventually ended up in prison, where he met a fellow inmate named George Young. They would both plan how to revolutionize the cocaine trade and begin transporting drugs to the United States using small planes. Leder had already started the business before meeting Pablo Escobar, and was even instrumental in Escobar becoming as wealthy as he was. Leder would become a billionaire and even offered to pay Colombia's external debt twice, one of which was his escape plan. Unlike on the show where Leder was just a jerk who was told to shut up in meetings and outed himself on national radio on a regular basis, the depiction of his story and fall from grace was far from complete. How could such a dangerous mafia have been shut down? That was not true. Number 7. Secrets of La CATEDRAL. The show depicts Escobar's 5-star prison as luxurious, with many of the drug lord's possessions, but it does not reveal everything. Remember the recordings the film has discussed? Even more, Escobar's content was hidden in the CATEDRAL. In the film, Escobar leaves behind a large book filled with photographs. However, in Agent Murphy and Peña's book, Manhunters, How We Brought Down Pablo Escobar, they explained that they discovered a film canister in the trash in his adjoining office. When the film was developed, they discovered photos of Escobar and used them to create wanted posters. Peña also claims that they had every wanted poster issued against him in Colombia and nearly every article published about him in his files. They also kept threatening letters from his adversaries. Escobar was meticulously organized, which was evident in La Catedral's bathrooms, which Peña describes as strangely sparkling with 3-inch walls. Still, perhaps the most shocking discoveries were the letters from mothers offering their daughters to Pablo for sex, the lace, negligées, several vibrators, and sex toys neatly arranged in a closet. However, one intriguing aspect of their book is the fact that Peña slept in Escobar's bed. He recalls being unable to sleep in his bed, tossing and turning all night. Number 6. Recordings of Escobar. The show was so detailed because of some recordings. Pablo Escobar believed in keeping records of events, including videoing events in his haciendas. With this, they were able to create a fairly accurate model of Escobar's and the people around him's daily conversations, fashion, and activities. However, while in the film, Escobar is mostly sitting around brooding and staring into space, contemplating how to make the next big move in his wars with the government. The truth is a little different, as Escobar contributed significantly to the show's production. The Medellin cartel was a fan of the media, as evidenced by the inclusion of some of his recordings in the show depicting the activities within his haciendas. Pablo would have loved Twitter, especially since he was willing to buy or kidnap news reporters to tell his story. Number 5. The original plan of Narco. According to the story, Netflix intended the story to be a full-length feature film rather than a television show. However, when they started gathering evidence and researching the king of cocaine, they realized that a single film would not suffice. Instead, they discovered several stories about the origins of his wealth, beginning with a man named Cockroach, known as Mateo Moreno, and his life before smuggling, including gravestone theft. All of this, combined with the information from personal experiences brought to the table by DEA agents Steve Murphy and Javier Peña, demonstrated to the producers that they knew nothing about Escobar. Narcos was thus born. Bernardo Aparicio Garcia, who grew up in Escobar and around Colombia, writes for Vox and praises the show's thoroughness. He cited, among other things, the accurate portrayal of ethnic diversity and smaller details, such as miniature facades of colonial village houses hanging on the walls of Pablo's mother's home. Number 4. The relationship of Pablo with his family. Given that the man's family was not consulted despite their importance to the story, it's only natural that their interactions with Pablo were imaginative, which is a risky way to tell a story, especially if you already have preconceived notions. Perhaps no other relationship was as misunderstood as Pablo Escobar's with his son, Juan Pablo, now known as Sebastian Marroquin. Sebastian is now free of the drug trade business and frequently speaks about his experiences as the son of the most powerful drug trafficker in several interviews. In these interviews, he explains how much his father loved him while also balancing the picture of the consequences of his father's violent activities. Well, he learned so much about violence that he became a man of peace, he once said. Sebastian claims that his father taught him about all drugs, with marijuana being Pablo's favorite. He should consult with him if he ever decides to experiment with drugs. Perhaps it was the education or the memory of a relative who had suffered from the effects of drug abuse, but Sebastian has never felt compelled to use drugs. Nevertheless, Sebastian's interview contains an important detail. He and his mother begged Don Pablo to stop his incursions into Colombia, particularly after the bombing that left his sister Manuela permanently deaf in one ear. Their pleadings, of course, fell on deaf ears, and Juan Pablo attributes this to his father's nature as a bad loser. He gave examples of how he would cheat even his children when they played games like Monopoly just to win. In the show, Juan Pablo is portrayed as being very young and naive, even when Pablo calls him minutes before his death. Still, in real life, Juan Pablo was already 16 when his father died, and he has a radically different account of Don Pablo's death than what is in the show, and we'll get there soon. Number 3. M19 True Nature. Most experts will disagree with this aspect of Narcos. M19 was one of Colombia's largest guerrilla groups. Left-wing nationalism, Bolivarianism, revolutionary socialism, and co-theory inspired by Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara were among their ideologies. M19 is portrayed in the show as a group of naive idealists who knew nothing about guerrilla warfare, and were led by an ex-college professor who also knew nothing about guerrilla warfare. That was all false. That is a dramatic misrepresentation of the facts, my friends. M19 had one of Colombia's most feared presences, Leonardo Aparicio Garcia, who detailed how his aunt had narrowly escaped the Palace of Justice attack. He summarizes the story by saying, not only did his family in Cali come dangerously close to death at their hands, they were truly powerful and knew how to strike fear. Also, Ivan Marino Ospina, or Ivan the Terrible, was an experienced guerrilla leader as opposed to his portrayal as Ivan Torres in the show. Before becoming leader of M19, Ivan Marino Ospina had already fought in Venezuela, gotten arrested and tortured to the point of nearly committing suicide only to escape 6 months later. While disguising as an army major, he was called Ivan el Terrible because it is thought unlikely that Ivan was murdered by Pablo. Some even speculate that he did not give Escobar the famous Bolivar sword. Number 2. The gruesomeness of Pablo Escobar. Watching the show, you get the impression that Pablo Escobar was one of the most terrifying men ever walking the Earth's surface. However, Agent Steve Murphy, speaking in Lithuania for login conferences, explains how, before Escobar, law enforcement was unfamiliar with narco-terrorism. Narco-terrorism is the use of violence to persuade governments to oppose narcotics laws. Murphy claims Pablo Escobar was the first narco-terrorist, and his terrorist activities are well documented in the show. However, it's also shown that Escobar had no trouble placing his order. Except for the undeniable instances like the killings of Moncada and Gallano, Pablo's dealings with people appear to be a bit benign, never resulting in anything deadly. In his personal space, Pablo is mostly shown as a troubled man with a romantic relationship with his wife and kids. Don Pablo was a drug lord through and through, according to first-hand accounts from informants. Pablo would drill into his enemies' kneecaps if he felt like it. Another unspoken fact is Pablo's treatment of mules. In the film, Pablo uses human mules and always pays them. In reality, Pablo sewed cocaine into pets traveling to Miami, and mules were occasionally killed to avoid spending money. This from the seventh richest man in the world who was an informant for agents Murphy and Peña at one of Pablo's parties. Another waiter was caught pilfering silverware, according to the informant. When Pablo learned of this, he decided to duct tape the person's hands and throw them into the pool made by Paisa Robin Hood, where they drowned as entertainment for guests at the party. Another known instance is that Escobar murdered every single architect who worked on any of his hundreds of houses. Escobar killed these architects, all of whom were Italian, because he didn't want anyone to know the secrets of each estate. In the case of childhood friends Moncada and Gallano, Escobar was said to have sent the men's fingers to their family members. According to Bernardo Aparicio Garcia, the show largely glosses over his gratuitous cruelty, which makes you wonder about the true extent of his cruelty not portrayed in Narcos. Number 1. Suicide of Pablo Escobar. If you know anything about Pablo Escobar's story, suicide must be a strange word associated with his death. But pay attention, and we'll see where this leads.
¡Sargento Sarmiento! ¡Le acaba de disparar a Pablo Escobar! ¡Está vivo!
All that time hunting him. And just like that, I'm looking down at Pablo fucking Escobar.
Pablo Escobar killing himself is a claim made by close family members such as his brothers and, most importantly, his son, Juan Pablo. Juan Pablo was the last personal patron to speak to before he died, and he makes a compelling case for why he believes his father committed suicide. Consider his arguments. Juan Pablo claims that his father always told him the telephone was death. Don Pablo was well aware that the DEA, CIA, Center Spike, and police officers were monitoring the airwaves to triangulate the locations of cartel members. Nevertheless, Pablo Escobar spent very little time on the phone and instructed his son to avoid using it at all costs. The second point is that Escobar's family had recently been denied entry into Germany and were forced to stay in a Colombian hotel owned by the armed forces. This implies that Escobar's family was never safe wherever they went, and that the hotel phone lines were almost certainly tapped. Pablo must have been aware of these facts. The third point is that Pablo had taught his son how to commit suicide in case they were apprehended. Juan Pablo claims that his father advised him to shoot into the right ear rather than the mouth to avoid torture and die quickly. Pablo's brothers confirmed that Pablo had stated that he would rather kill himself than be killed by the people pursuing him because death would not be pleasant. With these facts in mind, let's relive Pablo's final moments. Colonel Martinez and his son, Lieutenant Martinez, were using the directional finding gear to try and find any phone signal. At the same time, Pablo Escobar was on the phone with his son, Juan Pablo, discussing an interview that Juan Pablo was already aware of. Juan Pablo claims that his father called him 7 times. While attempting to cut the call each time, he recalls complaining to his father that this was dangerous because their phone was most likely tapped, and he was already aware of the discussed topic. Juan Pablo realizes that his father was attempting to save them from interrogation by giving up himself while on the phone. Lieutenant Martinez was holding an antenna from the vehicle when he noticed the king of cocaine. Looking back at him, they stormed the house after the police had gathered enough force, and only then did Pablo drop the call and say, "Something strange is happening here. I'll call you back." His bodyguard Limon is killed, and Pablo was shot on the roof. A bullet wound was discovered on Pablo's head multiple times before his body went limp on inspection. Guess where that is? Right behind his right ear. Oddly, he was discovered and murdered exactly 1 day after his birthday. It was almost as if someone wanted to have the Last Supper. A proper last laugh. What do you think about these 10 things Netflix was hiding about Pablo Escobar? Have you learned some new hidden facts? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more such videos.